Hello and welcome to another edition of Career Magic with Nitin Kulkarni. Today I'm going to talk about arguing, something we do on a regular basis. Most of us do. Whether it's on social media, whether in the workplace or at home, argument is something we do all the time. When something that is important to us is being discussed and we have an argument with another person, we tend to get into a situation where we want to put forward our point of view, often forcefully, and to convince the other person of the merit of our argument. I know that I get into these frequently. On social media, for example, there is a group I have with a bunch of college friends. Lots of them are opinionated people, and when there is something going on there, and when someone states a strong position that I disagree with, and the topic is important to me, I don't do it very often, but if the topic is really important to me, I get into an argument. And sometimes it doesn't end well. It gets a little ugly, it gets a little nasty, and sometimes it doesn't end well and leaves a bad taste in the mouth. It's very suboptimal, right? This also happens at home, this happens in the workplace, but we can't get away from arguments. If we want to improve decision making, if we want to improve the way things are done, then arguments are important. But how do we do this better? And I came across this book by an American philosopher called Daniel Dennett. The name of the book is Intuition Pumps. And in this, Dennett provides what he calls tools for thinking. And one of the topics he talks about is arguing with care. And there he refers to 4 rules and he calls them Rappaport's rules. Why Rappaport's rules? Because he learned those from an Ukrainian American mathematical psychologist, whatever that means. He learned those from Anatole Rappaport, and so in his book, Dennett has sort of stated them in his own words, and I'm going to use those words from Dennett's book for the discussion today. Dennett says that the way he has described them makes them more general and usable for us in our daily lives. So let's look at what those rules are before we get into a discussion. The first rule, the first Rappaport rule of arguing with care is re-express the other person's position so clearly, vividly, and fairly that they say, thanks, I wish I had thought of putting it that way. How beautiful. The second rule of Rappaport is list any points of agreement between the two sides, especially if they are not matters of general or widespread agreement. This requires us to think a little bit about our position and find those points of agreement. Mention anything you have learned from the other person. During the course of understanding the nuances and the context of their argument, you might learn something from them. State it. And only then are you permitted to say so much as a word of rebuttal or criticism. That is the point at which you can start framing your argument or start refuting the argument of the other party. Now look at these 4 rules and reflect for a moment. This is a very high bar. Most of us, most of the time, fall way short of this yardstick. But this is a wonderful way to think about getting into an argument or arguing an important topic if you want to get something useful out of it. Arguing with care. Even if we cannot reach this ideal, if we give this a shot and learn to do this over a period of time, we will be much better off, because we will create an environment in which the other person will feel free to talk, listen, and try and come up with something that works for both. So let's examine these. I do a lot of work on emotional intelligence. So I do assessments, I do one-on-one coaching, I do group coaching, I do skill development with emotional intelligence as a foundation so that we can get better at doing. I fundamentally believe that emotional intelligence is a really important competence for leaders, to be a good leader. And there are several emotional intelligence competencies that come into play when we are trying to apply Rappaport's rules. The first one of them is impulse control. Number two, empathy, and subordinate to empathy. A big part of empathy is listening and humility. And another important competency, emotional intelligence competency that comes into play here is flexibility. So let me talk about these rules and one by one see how these competencies apply and why applying Rappaport's rules will automatically help us improve our emotional intelligence. So let's look at them one at a time. Re-expressing the other person's positions clearly, vividly, and fairly, where they acknowledge that, yeah, wow, you said it beautifully. I wish I had thought of putting it that way. That can only happen if we listen. If we have, and the basis of good listening is empathy. You want to understand. Stephen Covey famously said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. That is what Rappaport's rule number 1 tells us. First, seek to understand. So, to apply the first rule, you have to listen actively. You have to ask a lot of questions. You have to be curious. And you have to exercise a great deal of impulse control to not jump in and start arguing or refuting when as they speak. So listen carefully, ask a lot of questions, gather information. You are not driving agreement. If you are listening like this intently and being curious about it, it doesn't mean you are agreeing. You're just seeking to understand where they are coming from, what their context is, and what the nuances of their argument are. So once you have done this and are able to articulate, so one of the core requirements of empathy is not just that you get into another person's shoes and understand how they feel, but also then you are able to articulate how they feel clearly and which then they agree with. So Rappaport's first rule embodies the definition of empathy. Once you have done this with a great deal of impulse control and good listening skills with empathy, you then should have the flexibility to examine their point of view with yours and find agreement or a match at levels that may not be obvious, and state that yeah, you know what, listening to you now, I think there are several things that we can agree on and we do agree on, which I now understand, and state those. It sets the stage for a more productive conversation. Then mention anything you have learned from the other person. Again, emotional intelligence competencies of humility and flexibility come in here. Why flexibility? Because you are willing to acknowledge that, yeah, you know what, I didn't know this before, but I know it now. And I am willing to be flexible to understand, even if I may not agree with you, understand where you are coming from, and in the process, if I learn something, to acknowledge that I have learned it. So these emotional intelligence competencies help us get through the first 3 steps. And only then we start to talk about our side of the story or start to rebut or refute some of the arguments made by the other side. If we do this, what does this do? It makes us much more caring about the other perspective. If while we are gathering this information and listening to the other person, if ever they say that, hey, wait, please, let me finish my point and then you will have your chance, you're not listening. Because then you are interrupting and trying to get your point across. You're not really following Rappaport's rules in spirit. So, listen, okay. Now, when you have done the first three things, the other person is likely to be in a state of mind where they are likely to be charitable to your agreement and might return the favor. Even if they didn't know Rappaport's rules, by following them, what you have done is you have shown them that you care. And there is a very good chance that the favor would be returned at least up to a point. And then you can start to talk about your side of the story. You can start trying this. This is quite a wonderful way to start becoming more emotionally intelligent and also starting to get more out of situations where there is a difference of opinion on a topic that is important to you. Try this in difficult conversations. Try this at home. For example, you're having an argument with your teenager. There's a difference of opinion on how they are doing things and how you think they ought to do. Listen to them. Unless you can state where they are coming from, what their context is, what their needs are, what the nuances of their argument are. If you can state it and they nod their head going, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, that is when then you can move to rule 2, 3 and 4 and start to have a more productive conversation. So try this stuff. Leave me a comment if this resonates with you. And subscribe to this channel if you would like to hear more of these and would like to be notified about new videos that I put up. So all the very best, and see you on the next edition of Career Magic with Nitin Kulkarni.